The corner of Delano and Ninth smelled like diesel exhaust and three-day-old rain. A cardboard sign leaned against the cinder block planter, its letters gone soft in the damp air, the words still legible, but only just. Veteran. Disabled. Anything helps. The man holding it sat with his back against the planter's rough face, one leg extended straight in front of him, the other bent at the knee, a canvas duffel bag wedged against his hip like something he intended to keep. His name was Marcus Deal, and he had been sitting on that corner for 11 days. He had not chosen the corner for any particular reason. The planter blocked the worst of the wind. The gas station, 2 blocks west, had a bathroom the attendant let him use if he was quiet about it. The breakfast cart on 9th ran until 9:30, and sometimes the woman who ran it, a wide-faced Guatemalan named Petra, would hand him the last of the day's pan dulce in a paper sleeve without charging him. Those were the calculations of a man managing survival in increments. Marcus was good at increments. He had been trained to be. He was 43 years old, and he had spent 11 of those years in uniform, 2 of them in places he did not discuss, 3 of them in a VA hospital system that had addressed the obvious wound to his left knee, while leaving the less visible ones to fester on their own timeline. The knee had healed badly. He walked with a locked gait that strangers sometimes mistook for arrogance, a slow, deliberate stride that looked like he was picking his steps on purpose. He was. The alternative was falling. The piece of his life between the discharge and the corner on Delano was not a story he told in order. There had been an apartment in Fresno, a job loading freight at a warehouse off the interstate, a supervisor who understood the knee would be slow some mornings, and one who did not, and then a long, flattening stretch that ended with him here. 43 years old, canvas duffel, cardboard sign. The numbers on his phone had dwindled to 7 contacts, and of those 7, only 2 picked up any more. That was the condition of his life on the morning of October 14th, when the Harley rolled up to the red light at Delano and 9th. It was a Road King, dark blue with chrome so clean it looked lit from inside, and the man on it wore a leather cut over a gray thermal, the back panel covered in patches, a death's head medallion centered between the shoulder blades and the chapter rocker curving below it in red and white. He was large in the way that a man becomes large after decades of physical labor, not sculpted but dense, as though gravity had compressed him over time. A silver beard covered most of his face. His name was Darnell Hutchins, and he went by Hatch, and he had been the road captain of the Redwood Valley Charter for 9 years, a position that meant he was the man who knew every highway between the coast and the valley floor. The light was red. Hatch sat on the idling bike, one boot on the asphalt, and he was watching the traffic camera at the opposite corner when Marcus Deal stood up and hobbled toward him. Marcus had not planned to approach anyone. He needed directions, not money, not conversation. He had an appointment at the VA clinic on Hendricks Street, and he had been given the cross street but not the block number, and his phone's map application had died with the battery 2 hours earlier. He needed Hendricks. He asked the man on the motorcycle where it was. Hatch turned. He looked at Marcus the way a person looks when they are actually seeing someone rather than classifying them. His eyes moved from the locked knee to the canvas duffel to the worn collar of Marcus's jacket, a field jacket that still had the unit patch on the sleeve, a faded airborne tab above a shoulder insignia from the 82nd. Hatch's jaw shifted once inside the silver beard. "Hendricks runs north from the river," he said. "You want the clinic or the main building?" Marcus stopped. Something about the question landed differently than he expected. The man had identified the destination from the direction alone, which meant he knew the VA campus on Hendricks well enough to distinguish between its buildings. Clinic, Marcus said. 3 blocks north of the river bridge, left on Kellerman. Look for the green awning. They moved it 2 years ago. Most of the bus drivers still give you the old address. He paused. You got a way to get there? Marcus said he would walk. Hatch looked at the knee again. Not with pity, but with the flat assessment of a man who had measured distances against limitations before. He did not say anything further. The light changed. He rolled through the intersection, and Marcus watched the Road King move east until it was a blue and chrome shape disappearing around the curve. And then he picked up his duffel and started north toward the river. He made his appointment. The clinic processed him, updated his file, confirmed the disability rating that had been contested twice in 4 years and that had finally, after the second appeal, been acknowledged at 70%. A thin woman with close-cropped gray hair named Dr. Fennick reviewed his knee, adjusted his prescription, and told him that the housing assistance application he had filed in August was still pending. Still pending. The phrase had a weight that landed differently each time he heard it. He thanked her and walked back out into the October light. He did not see Hatch again for 6 days. In those 6 days, a man named Glenn Profit made Marcus Deal's corner very difficult to occupy. Profit managed 4 properties on the south end of Delano. Squat commercial buildings rented to a tire shop, a check-cashing service, an insurance brokerage, and a dry cleaning operation. He was a compact man in his early 50s, sandy-haired and precise in the way that men who have always had a little money tend to be precise, his collars clean, his voice measured, his frustration expressed not through volume, but through a particular narrowing of the eyes that the people who worked for him had learned to recognize. He had called the city's non-emergency line 3 times in 11 days about the man on the corner. The city had sent an outreach worker twice. Both times Marcus had declined service calmly, and the outreach worker had left. There was nothing to compel removal. Marcus was on a public sidewalk. He was not obstructing anything. Profit understood this. He adapted. On day 12, one of Profit's maintenance men, a heavyset young man named Tolliver, who drove a white pickup with the property management company's logo on the door, began parking the truck directly in front of the cinder block planter for 8-hour stretches. The planter was at the edge of a commercial loading zone. Tolliver was not loading anything. He was simply there, engine off, radio up, eating lunches from a styrofoam container, and watching Marcus with the studied incuriousness of a man following instructions. Marcus moved 6 feet east. Tolliver moved the truck 6 feet east. This continued for 2 days. On the 3rd day, Marcus moved around the corner onto 9th, where there was a bus shelter and a bench that the city had bolted down 14 months ago, and which no one had contested as a resting place. Tolliver did not follow him to the bench. Tolliver's instructions apparently had a geographic boundary. The bench faced the mouth of a parking structure that served a small retail strip. It was a different corner, less foot traffic, no Petra and her pan dulce cart, no familiar rhythm to the days. Marcus had his duffel and his sign and the 7 contacts on his phone and the VA appointment card in his breast pocket. He reset. He had been on the bench for 3 days when Hatch came back. The Road King pulled into the parking structure and came back out on foot, a paper bag from the diner 2 doors down hanging from one hand. Hatch paused at the mouth of the structure and looked at Marcus the same way he had looked at him through the stopped traffic on October 14th, with that flat assessing quality, taking in the new location without commenting on it. He walked over and set the paper bag on the bench beside Marcus, without asking permission. Moved, Marcus said. It was not a question. Noticed. Hatch sat on the other end of the bench and propped his forearms on his knees. He was not looking at Marcus now, but at the far side of the street, at the traffic moving on 9th. Profits Property Management runs that block on Delano. He does this. Marcus looked at the bag. Inside it were a turkey sandwich cut in halves, a container of soup, and a sleeve of crackers. He did not touch it yet. You know him, Marcus said. Know of him. He's done it to 2 other people in the last 3 years. Hatch's voice had a low, worn quality, like a gear that had been well used. One was a woman with a stroke, 60 years old. He had his people move her twice before she gave up and left the neighborhood entirely. Social services never found her again. A bus went past on 9th, close enough that Marcus felt the air displacement against his face. He picked up the soup. You were in the 82nd, Hatch said. It was not a question either. 8 years. Hatch nodded once, slowly, as though confirming something he had already calculated. He asked about the deployment tab on the jacket, and Marcus gave him the deployment, and Hatch gave back a year and a theater that told Marcus the man across from him on the bench had served. Not in the same branch, not in the same era. The silver in the beard marked a 15-year distance at minimum, but had served. They did not make more of it than that. Neither man was given to making more of things than they were. They sat together for 20 minutes. When Hatch stood to leave, he put a hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder, not squeezing, just placing it there for a second before lifting it away. He said he would be back. Marcus ate the sandwich. The soup was chicken and wild rice and still warm. Hatch came back the next afternoon and the afternoon after that. On the 4th visit, he brought a younger man with him, a wiry 20-something with a shaved head and a silver stud in one ear who went by the name Ticker, a club prospect who wore a cut without full patches and who carried a tablet computer tucked under one arm as though it were a textbook. Ticker sat on the bench beside Marcus and opened the tablet and began asking him questions that were not the questions of a social worker. He was not asking about Marcus's needs. He was asking about profit. Marcus told him what he knew: the loading zone, Tolliver and the white pickup, the phone calls to the city, the 2 outreach visits. Ticker typed without apparent urgency, pausing occasionally to ask for a spelling or a date. And when Marcus mentioned that Tolliver had once left the white pickup, blocking a curb cut on Delano for an entire Thursday, Ticker made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and typed something with particular care. There's a transit accessibility ordinance, Ticker said. Blocking a curb cut is a $250 citation per incident. If it happened more than once, the vehicle's owner of record gets the notice. Owner of record on that truck is Profits LLC. Marcus said nothing. He was watching Ticker's hands on the screen. He filed a noise complaint against you in September, Ticker said, reading now. September 22nd. The complaint listed your location as a commercial zone and alleged you were soliciting aggressively. He looked up at Marcus. Were you? I was sitting, Marcus said. That's what I thought. Ticker closed the tablet. He looked at Hatch, who was standing with his back against the parking structure wall, watching the street. Some kind of decision passed between them without words. What happened in the next 5 days was not visible to Marcus from where he sat on the bench on 9th Street. He understood that things were being done. Ticker stopped by twice more with his tablet. Hatch came once, stayed an hour, brought a thermos of coffee and 2 cups, and said nothing about whatever was being assembled on his behalf. The information reached Marcus in the same currency it left him, which was not in the form of explanations. He asked Hatch once, directly, what was happening. Hatch looked at the thermos. "We're pulling his record," Hatch said. "Profit. All of it. Permit history. Complaint history. The LLC filings, the violations. Ticker has contacts in the county assessor's office." He poured the second cup and held it out. "It takes the time it takes." Marcus wrapped both hands around the cup. The October air had turned, the warmth gone out of the afternoons, and the steam from the coffee rose and dispersed in the gray light. He asked why. Hatch was quiet for a long moment. He did not look at Marcus when he answered. He looked at the middle distance, at some point between the street and the buildings on the far side. The way a man looks when the answer to a question lives in a place he does not visit out loud very often. "Because you asked me where a street was," Hatch said, "and you said thank you, and you have an airborne tab on your jacket and a busted knee, and Prophet has 4 buildings, and a truck, and a man he pays to sit in it." He took a drink of his own coffee. "That's why." Marcus looked at the bench between them. He had nothing adequate to say to that, so he said nothing, and Hatch did not seem to need him to. The call came on the 23rd of October, 9 days after the bench conversation, 7 days after Ticker had first opened his tablet. Marcus's phone rang at 7:15 in the morning, and the number was Hatch's. The voice on the other end was not Hatch's. It was a man with a voice that came from somewhere deeper in the chest than ordinary conversation. A low, rumbling authority that Marcus recognized even before the man gave his name. He said his name was Roland Cruz, and that he was the president of the Redwood Valley Charter, and that he had been briefed on Marcus Deal's situation, and that he would like Marcus to be at the corner of Delano and 9th at 10 o'clock on the morning of Saturday the 25th. Marcus said he would be there. "Good," Roland Cruz said. He did not elaborate. Marcus spent the next 36 hours cycling through every interpretation of what he had just agreed to. He was not a naive man. He understood the organization by name and by reputation, had seen their cuts on a dozen faces in the last 3 weeks alone in a county where they were not absent. He had agreed to be at a specific place on a specific day at the request of the president of a Hells Angels charter, a man he had never met because a man named Hatch had once told him where a street was and come back with soup. The logic was crooked. He could not find the angle that made it dangerous, and he had spent 36 years learning to find the dangerous angles. He slept on the bench with his duffel against his back and his eyes on the parking structure entrance, and on Saturday morning he stood up at 9:45 and limped to the corner of Delano and 9th and waited. At 5 minutes to 10 he heard them. He heard them before he saw them, the way you hear a storm before you see it, a low collective rumble that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, vibrating in the sidewalk under his feet, in the shop windows across the street, in the fillings in his back teeth. The sound multiplied until it was not a sound anymore, but a physical condition, a pressure in the chest cavity that redefined the ambient world. Then they appeared around the curve on Delano, headlights blazing in the thin morning light, 30 motorcycles in a disciplined 2x2 formation, chrome and leather and engine noise rolling toward him like a slow tide. Marcus Deal did not move. His hands hung at his sides, his left knee locked in its familiar way and held. He had stood in positions like this before, in places where movement was the wrong choice and stillness was the only correct one. And some part of his spine remembered what the rest of his nervous system was failing to compute. Hold the ground, stand straight, let it come to you. 30 motorcycles rolled to a stop and filled the length of Delano Street in both directions from the intersection. Engines cut one by one, the sound collapsing in stages, until the last bike went quiet, and the street was filled with the tick of cooling metal and the scrape of boots on asphalt. 30 men dismounted. They stood by their bikes and watched Marcus with a collective stillness that had its own kind of weight. A figure separated from the group and walked toward him. Roland Cruz was in his early 60s, built along the same heavy, compacted lines as Hatch, but taller, with the posture of a man who had never in his life checked to see who was in the room before he walked into it. He had a shaved head and a gray beard trimmed shorter than Hatch's, and his leather cut was older than most of the bikes on the street, the patches worn soft with time. He stopped 2 feet from Marcus Deal and looked at him without preliminary. "You the veteran," Roland said. Not a question. "I am," Marcus said. Roland looked at the canvas duffel on the ground beside Marcus's leg. He looked at the locked knee. He looked at the field jacket and the airborne tab. His expression did not shift from its baseline, which was the expression of a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by the distance between what the world owed people and what it gave them. "Hatch says you didn't ask for any of this," Roland said. "I didn't. That's the only reason it works." He turned and looked back at the formation on Delano Street, at the 30 men standing by their machines in the October morning. Then he turned back to Marcus. "Prophet is going to have a bad day. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to be part of it. We're here. That's the part you need to understand." Marcus understood. He had spent 20 years in situations where the important information was not the mission objective, but the composition of the force beside you. He looked at the 30 men on Delano Street, and he understood the composition of that force the way he would have understood a perimeter. Solid, dressed and spaced, not going anywhere. "What's Prophet got?" Marcus asked. "Zoning violations on 2 of the 4 buildings," Ticker said from somewhere to Marcus's left, appearing with his tablet as though he had materialized out of the chrome and leather. "The tire shop on the corner is operating with a commercial permit that expired in February. He's been collecting rent on an expired permit for 8 months. The check cashing service has a predatory lending complaint filed with the state in August that he responded to by having his attorney file a counter-complaint against the complainant." He looked up from the screen. The complainant was 61 years old and recovering from a stroke. The woman Hatch had mentioned. Marcus looked at Ticker. "Same woman," Ticker said. "She's in a shelter in Stockton. She doesn't know we know about her." He closed the tablet. "She will." Glenn Prophet arrived at his property management office at 9:57, which was precise for a Saturday, because Prophet was precise on Saturdays as he was precise on all days, and he stopped his silver Audi in the parking bay beside the dry cleaning operation, and got out and looked at Delano Street and stood very still beside his car door. 30 motorcycles, 30 men, all of them standing, none of them in his parking bay, none of them on his properties, none of them in his loading zone. They were on the public street and on the public sidewalk, where they had every legal right to be, arranged in a formation that said everything it needed to say without saying a word. Roland Cruz walked to where Prophet stood by the Audi. He walked at his own pace, unhurried, and Prophet did not move until Roland stopped 6 feet away from him. Then Prophet moved, and the movement was the wrong one, the one that revealed the thing he actually was beneath the clean collars and the measured voice. He moved backward, 1 step, automatic and unconscious, toward the car door he had left open. "Glenn," Roland said. His voice had that low chest register that carried without effort on the open air. "You know a man named Marcus Deal?" Prophet said he did not. "You know a man who sits at your corner with a cardboard sign," Roland said. "You've made 9 calls to the city about him. You paid a man named Tolliver to park a truck in his space for a week. You had Tolliver follow him around the corner after he moved." Roland let that sit for a moment. The 30 men on the street were not looking at Prophet. They were not looking at anything in particular. They were simply there, present in the way that a wall is present. "You filed a false nuisance complaint against a man with a 70% disability rating for sitting on a public sidewalk." Prophet's eyes moved to the line of motorcycles and came back to Roland. His mouth opened and produced some words about property values and neighborhood character, and his rights as a property manager. And Roland listened to all of it with the patience of a man who has heard every version of that speech and knows exactly where each version ends. He let Prophet finish. "You have a zoning violation on the tire shop that is 8 months old," Roland said. "Ticker is going to file that complaint with the city on Monday. He's also going to contact the state on the predatory lending complaint against your check-cashing operation, on behalf of a woman named Hortensia Vargas, who you ran off this neighborhood 3 months ago and who currently does not have permanent housing." He paused. "You're going to walk into that office and you are going to write a letter to the City Housing Authority supporting Marcus Deal's pending application. And you are going to write a letter to the County Veteran Services Office identifying him as a known resident of this neighborhood in good standing, and you are going to call Tolliver and tell him his Saturday mornings belong to him again." Prophet stood by the open car door. The precise, sandy-haired quality of him had gone somewhere. He looked like a man who has just understood that the room he walked into has no back wall. "And if I don't," he said. It was the wrong thing to say. Everyone on the street knew it was the wrong thing to say the moment it left his mouth. Roland did not change expression. He simply waited, as though Prophet had not spoken at all, as though he were giving the man the grace of taking the words back. Prophet did not take them back. He was waiting for Roland to finish the sentence, to deliver the threat in the specific form he was accustomed to, the form he could engage with legally, argue against, forward to an attorney. Roland did not finish the sentence. He stood in front of Prophet and looked at him with a flat, complete absence of threat, which was more terrifying than any specific threat would have been, because a specific threat can be defended against, and this could not. After 12 seconds, which is a very long time to stand in front of 30 silent men on an empty Saturday morning street, Prophet said he would do it. Roland turned and walked back to his motorcycle. He did not look at Prophet again. Hatch came to stand beside Marcus, and they watched together as Prophet went into his office. The office had a glass front, and they could see him moving inside, sitting at his desk, picking up his phone. His movements had the quality of a man whose joints have gone stiff. He wrote for 12 minutes. He made 2 phone calls. When he came back out, he crossed the parking lot to where Marcus stood and held out an envelope. Marcus did not reach for it immediately. He looked at Prophet's face, at the expensive clothes that now seemed to fit differently than they had an hour ago, as though the man inside them had contracted slightly, and then he took the envelope. "Tolliver is off the schedule," Prophet said. His measured voice had a crack in it now, small but audible. "I'll make the calls on Monday." He went back to his Audi and drove away. Marcus held the envelope. Hatch stood beside him and said nothing. Around them on Delano Street, engines were beginning to turn over again, a slow sequential restart that moved up the line from back to front. Not leaving yet, just idling. Roland Cruz came to Marcus last. He stopped in front of him and looked at him for a long moment. The same assessing look that Hatch had given him, through the red light on Delano 3 weeks earlier, the look that saw the man instead of the corner and the cardboard. "You got somewhere to be tonight?" Roland asked. Marcus said he did not. "Clubhouse is on Farrier Road, north end of the county. Hatch knows the way." He looked at the duffel bag on the ground. "Bring that." He walked to his motorcycle, and the Road King started with a sound that reached into Marcus's sternum and held there, a deep, familiar vibration, the kind of sound that had a gravity to it, pulling things toward it rather than pushing them away. The formation reassembled itself in stages, bikes finding their positions with the ease of long practice, and then it began to move, east on Delano, chrome catching the thin October light, the engine noise rising and then smoothing into that long, sustained road rumble that Marcus felt long after the last tail light had gone around the curve. Hatch stayed. He sat on his Road King at the curb and waited while Marcus picked up his duffel and looked at the bench on 9th one last time. It was a public bench. It would be there. The envelope in his jacket pocket had letters in it that had his name on them, letters that said he was real, that he had been here, that an official record of his presence in this neighborhood existed and had been noted. The Housing Authority would receive one by Monday. The Veteran Services Office would receive the other. Ticker had filed the city complaint electronically that morning, 8 months of unpaid zoning violations, landing on a desk somewhere in the county building, time-stamped and irrevocable. Profit had not been destroyed. His properties were intact, his business continued, his life would resume its precise and measured rhythm. Marcus had not wanted him destroyed. He had wanted a corner and a bench and the right to sit on the public sidewalk with a cardboard sign without a truck being moved to shadow him. He had wanted the housing application to move. He had wanted to be in the record as a man who existed and was not a nuisance. He had that now. Hatch waited at the curb with the patience of a man who understood that some things take the time they take, and Marcus Deal looked at the corner of Delano and 9th one last time, and then swung the duffel over his shoulder and walked to where the motorcycle idled. The Farrier Road Clubhouse was an hour north, a long, low building set back from the road behind a chain-link fence, the lot full of bikes lined in their familiar, disciplined rows, a light burning orange through a frosted side window. Marcus climbed off the back of the Road King and stood for a moment in the parking lot gravel, his knees stiff from the ride, the cold air clean after the diesel and asphalt of the city. Inside, the room smelled like wood smoke, old leather, and the particular mix of machine oil and coffee that accumulated in a space where people worked with their hands and gathered in the same chairs for years. A long table ran down the center. 30 men found their places with the ease of people who had been finding their places at that table for a long time. A stool appeared at the end near the wood stove, placed there by a broad-shouldered man with the road name Dutchy stitched on his chest, who set it down without ceremony and went back to his own chair. Roland Cruz stood at the head of the table and waited for the room to settle. It settled quickly. "This is Marcus Deal," Roland said. 82nd Airborne. 11 years. 70% disabled. Housing application impending. Been sitting a corner on Delano for 3 weeks with a sign that says, "Veteran," because the systems he served and came home to have not yet seen fit to put a roof over him. He looked down the table and then back at Marcus. "He is ours to look after. That is the position of this charter." The room was quiet, not an uncomfortable quiet, but the quality of quiet that exists when 30 people are in agreement about something and there is nothing to add. Hatch pulled out the stool near the wood stove, and Marcus sat down. Someone put a mug of coffee in his hands. The wood stove ticked. The conversation at the table opened and spread and drew him in gradually, the way a fire draws you in from the edges, and Marcus Deal sat in the heat of it and drank the coffee and understood that the thing he had asked for on the morning of October 14th was directions to a street. He had not asked for any of this. He had not known it was available. He had not known it could be given by men in leather cuts who showed up 30 deep on a Saturday morning because one of their own had looked at a corner and done the arithmetic of what was right. The housing application moved in November, 2 weeks after Prophet's letter reached the authorities' desk. Ticker drove Marcus to the intake appointment at the County Veterans Services Office and waited in the parking lot, engine off, playing something through his earphones and not making anything of the wait. The intake coordinator was a thin man named Portillo, who had been in the Army and who recognized the airborne tab on the field jacket and said nothing about it beyond a small nod that meant what it meant. The application was expedited under a prioritization category for disabled veterans with documented community ties. Marcus moved into a studio on the north end of the county in December. The building was clean and quiet and had a parking space in the lot that he did not have a car to put in it yet, a detail that struck him as funny the first time he looked at it, the empty rectangle of asphalt reserved for his future possession. He put the canvas duffel in the bedroom closet and stood in the small kitchen and looked out at the lot and the fence line beyond it and the pale December sky over the county. On Saturdays, he rode with Hatch. Not every Saturday. Not as a prospect. Not with the expectation of anything. Just as a man who had been given a road and had learned to move along it at a speed that felt honest to his bones. His knee did not improve, and he did not ask it to. He kept his pace measured and his ground clear and his eyes on what was ahead rather than what was behind. And if the lean years had taught him anything, it was that the calculation of survival could be run forward as easily as backward, that the same arithmetic that told you how little you had could also tell you precisely what you had been given. Hortensia Vargas was located in Stockton in January. Ticker drove down on a Tuesday and sat with her for 3 hours and explained what had been filed and what the complaints had produced and what her options were. She was 62 and she had a niece in Modesto who had been looking for her since September. She cried when Ticker read her the niece's number off his screen. He held the phone out to her, and she took it with both hands and called the niece right there in the shelter common room, while Ticker sat 2 chairs away and looked at the wall and gave her the privacy of the space. That story was not Marcus's story to tell. He heard it from Hatch, who heard it from Ticker, who had told it briefly and without decoration, the way the men at that table tended to tell things. What mattered to Marcus was the thread of it, the way one man asking another man where a street was had eventually found a woman in a shelter 3 hours south who had not known anyone was looking. On a Saturday in February, Marcus sat in the lot behind the clubhouse and ran a clean rag along the chrome of Hatch's Road King while Hatch adjusted the tension on the rear drive belt. The lot smelled like cold air and machine oil. A dog named Duster, a brindle mutt belonging to a member named Soto, lay against the fence in a patch of weak winter sun. Marcus worked the rag into the curve of a headlight housing, and the chrome came up clean and catching the gray February light. He did not feel free of the corner on Delano. He was not sure freedom was the word for what he felt, or whether freedom was even the right category, whether what he had was not freedom so much as the specific, earned gravity of a man who has been given back the ground beneath his feet and knows the difference between standing on it and standing on nothing. He knew the difference. He had stood on nothing. He put the rag down and looked at the clean chrome and felt the cold air moving through the lot and thought that this was what it was, this exact temperature, this particular light, the dog against the fence, the sound of Hatch's wrench against the sprocket housing. This was what it was. If this story moved you the way it moved us, share it with someone who knows what it is to be overlooked and to be found anyway. These are the stories worth carrying forward.